Good afternoon, and welcome to Securing Your Medical Devices Against Cyberattack, a webinar tweet chat combo from HealthSystemCIO.com, produced in partnership with Chime, sponsored by Draeger. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the editor-in-chief of HealthSystemCIO.com, and I will be your moderator today. We are having a simultaneous tweet chat hosted by Kate Gamble, our managing editor and director of social media. You can participate in a separate browser or on your phone by using the hashtag HSCIOchat, or you can simply view the tweet chat in the media viewer panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll also be using the Q&A panel today. You can use that to send your questions in. As they occur to you, leave the default set to all panelists, and we'll take them later in the program. And you can also download the deck by using the URL on your screen, and it's been sent out in the chat box. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, first we're going to go about 35 minutes for a featured panel discussion. And we've got Eric Decker, Chief Security and Privacy Officer with the University of Chicago Medicine, Cletus Earle, VP and CIO with Kaleida Health, and Scott Bristol, Senior Information Security Manager with Draeger. So without further delay, we are going to jump right in. Let's start with you, Cletus. Cletus, can you give us an overview of your organization and role?
Yeah, good afternoon. Cletus Earle, I'm the Senior Vice President and CIO for Kaleida Health Systems. It's located in Western New York and now entry market into the Pennsylvania region. I'm also the current chair for Chime, the College of Health Information Management Executives for the 2018 season, per se. So excited to be here and look forward to a great discussion with my distinguished panel.
Very good. Eric?
Thanks, Anthony. This is Eric Decker. I'm the Chief Security and Privacy Officer for the University of Chicago Medicine. So we are an academic medical center in the south side of Chicago, going through all of the fun processes of merger acquisition as everybody else is. I'm also the chair of AHIS, which is the CISO organization under Chime within 2018. So I guess Cletus and I are going to be rolling off here at the end of the year and moving on to other pastures. And then in addition to that, I'm also the co-lead of the industry task force for the 405D effort that's being run by HHS. And this is an effort for establishing best practices, methodologies, and frameworks for cybersecurity across the country. And it's really a part of the process of the HKIC task force report that was released last June. So thank you.
Very good. Scott?
Hi, I'm Scott Bristol. I'm the Senior Manager of Product Security at Draeger Medical. Draeger Medical is a medical device manufacturer based out of Northern Germany with a presence worldwide. We sell heart rate monitors, anesthesia machines, ventilators, and incubators.
Very good, very good. All right. Next question. Cletus, let's start with you. What special dangers and challenges do biomedical devices present to an IT security team?
Well, you know, that's one of the big pressing questions that we have in our industry right now. Our legacy biomedical devices did not have the necessary controls around them, security controls, and what ends up happening as a result of that, many organizations have a significant inventory of these devices spread throughout the areas and organizations, and it's created a compromise of our environment. We naturally, in the last few years, we've had a concerted effort to harden our cyber hygiene regarding, regular compute devices, and we've done a relatively good job trying to secure those particular devices. Unfortunately, the biomedical devices, again, the ones that are old and aged, have not necessarily gone through those same level of controls and vigor associated protecting it, and has created a gaping hole for our organizations. So we've done a great job on hardening the shell, but we have an inner core that actually is still capable of being compromised, and it covers a litany of different devices across our care, whether it's implantables or other types of infusion devices that are walking around. So it poses a significant threat because of individual potential access, and as many of these devices are on, wireless infrastructures and sometimes goes out and are still accessible, it just posed a significant challenge for us, and hence why we're looking at doing a huge effort into, trying to right that ship and protecting our organizations from these particular devices and working with the medical device manufacturers in order to help rectify these challenges.
Very good. Eric, your thoughts?
To add on to what Cletus had said, so, the challenges that have been raised here are not new. I mean, the biomed space, clinical engineering space has sort of been present with this problem for 10, 15 years. It's evolved from its inception, 15, 20 years ago when these were all mostly closed system devices, and, we were dealing with proprietary operating systems and proprietary software that was being developed. What's happened is, and I won't even say necessarily that what's happened is both the consumerization of IT. I mean, that certainly increased the risk posture of these types of devices, because then you start using more consumer-grade IT type of technologies like Windows, et cetera. It puts the onus on the manufacturers to be able to keep up with that and keep up with those vulnerabilities that come through, and that's a challenge. But also the threat space, in my mind, about 2 or 3 years ago is when the cybersecurity in healthcare really made a big turn, towards it was already a challenge, and now it's getting far more challenging. And that's because the threats have really changed. There's a economic means behind wanting to attack healthcare systems now, between digital extortion attacks like ransomware and such, to being able to cause harm to a patient. And through these types of devices, the risk posture significantly changed. So when I talk about this with my executives and my board, I really talk keenly about 3 core main risks that we have, and one of them is around the confidentiality of privacy and information, which is always going to be there, and it's always going to be present. But the new landscape is the patient safety landscape, and that's directly related to the medical devices and directly related to how we have to work in partnership with the manufacturers and our providers. We have our own jobs to do in order to make sure that this stuff is properly secured.
Very good. Scott?
Yeah, I think I would agree with a lot of Eric's comments. Our challenge as well, from the medical device manufacturer perspective, is our legacy devices. A lot of these, I tell them, were made before the internet was invented. It seems kind of funny to say, but it's actually true for a lot of these devices. And as they get used in new and different ways, and we start interconnecting devices, the problem just escalates. And as always, it's a balance between new products and legacy products. And what we've done at Draeger is we've evaluated all our legacy products and tried to evaluate what can be done on them based on their architecture and their hardware. And we've done all the low-hanging fruit, what's been called the cybersecurity hygiene, as much as we can, given the platforms. But it's a concern for us as well from a risk management and patient safety perspective.
All right, very good. Next question, Eric, let's start with you here. Which other departments and personnel must the IT team work with to secure biomedical devices?
Yeah, so obviously there's the standard, your biomed or your clinical engineering groups. But don't forget the fact that you have a lot of other operational departments that are out there that work with med devices. So your radiology, your imaging, your peri-op, your anesthesiology departments. Sometimes these things can show up, in departmentally managed areas and might not have gone through sort of the standard IT. And that's if you're benefit from clinical engineering actually reporting into IT. That's not usually, or it's not always the case, I should say, not necessarily usually the case. So there's synergies, obviously, when you can have clinical engineering inside of the IT group. But when it's not inside the IT group, then you obviously have to work with the bounds between all those various departments.
Very good. Cletus?
Yeah, I actually would I agree with Eric completely, and I'd like to take a different spin that, you know, we currently have security as a separate division at times, depending on the organization, from IT. But those that are all combined, what we're starting to see as a trend is that biomedical security becoming an actual pillar within the security division. That's something that I think is going to be more and more needed and necessary, you know, just as far as the internal functionalities, as that group can actually work more intimately with these various departments that Eric just identified. I think it's essential for us to do that, as well as looking at you know, the Internet of Things, those particular devices that are wearables and other types of telehealth type of solutions. I don't know if many organizations are really taking the concerted effort of bringing all of those different technologies into the mix and the respective divisions that are responsible for those initiatives. So I definitely wanted to point out that, you know, you're starting to see trends, and you're starting to see those trend lines are going towards, again, a more assertive approach of dealing with biomedical security in its own kind of vertical, and it's providing some very good career pathways for some of our members in Chime.
Very good. All right, Scott, let's start with you here, and you may have touched on this a bit, but talk about the dangers that legacy biomedical devices present.
Sure. You know, some of the dangers are they just, as was mentioned before, they just weren't designed with the security controls. They were designed with safety. You know, we've always done that as a medical device industry, and you do get some inherent benefit from providing safe devices. But a lot of the challenges is not having, you know, encryption, hard-coded passwords, all the cybersecurity hygiene that we hear about. And the challenge from a manufacturer perspective is sometimes, given the hardware and the platform, some of these devices just don't have the CPU or the memory to add things like encryption and things like that. They just are made to do very limited functionality, and there's not a lot of headroom to design stuff in later. So that's one of the challenges from a manufacturer perspective, and it also is what poses a lot of the residual risk that's left over that our hospital partners see.
Cletus, anything you want to add there?
Whoops, I think some of the dangers that are added really, you know, also come down to the fact that our infusion pumps and these solutions that we have out there in the medical device world can actually be compromised with a click of a button. And, you know, there's been some, you know, cases out there that has shown evidence that this is happening. So I've been talking about this for a while. I'm very concerned about the depth of penetration that these kind of threats can have to our existing society. It's a very scary thought, but I think with the efforts that we're doing right now, having discussions like this is having that crucial conversation and start to work at you know, moving the dial with our colleagues on the Hill and the FDA, and also with our medical device manufacturers.
All right, so Cletus, so you say you've been working on this for a while, talking about this. So that tells us that this is not a problem that, you know, has a 6-month project management window. Okay, knock it out, we're done. This is kind of a bear that's really hard to sort of get one's arms around in a moving health system with lots of parts and thousands of devices and nurses, you know, God bless their souls, but trying to squirrel away devices so they know where they are when they need them, not for any nefarious reasons, but we know there's those kind of things. So just talk about how complex this is and why it's so difficult to sort of get this secured, locked down, and fixed.
Well, and I'll tee this up to Eric, but I think one of the biggest factors is the fact that we really have, to Scott's point, we have technology that's very old. And, and the cost associated with doing that is a Herculean effort. And one of the pieces that comes down to it is whose responsibility is it to go and get that done? Is it the mobile device manufacturers? Is it the organizations that purchase these devices? So I think those are some of the biggest challenges that we're seeing. I like the analogy you say that it's like a bear, but I actually would call it very similar to the Bigfoot. And the reason why I say Bigfoot, because it's it's an elusive character. If it exists, some people think it doesn't exist, but I think this is a huge issue, and many others think that this is a huge issue that needs to be remediated, but it's very elusive in order to try to put your finger on singularly how do you go about doing this as a collective industry.
Right. It's not a set of... Go ahead.
Anthony, I was just going to jump in. So, my perspective on this, and I'm going to perhaps shockingly sympathize with the manufacturers here a little bit because, in the past, the manufacturer-provider relationship can be a bit challenged, but I think that we've come a long way in trying to help solve this problem that you're talking about as an ecosystem and as a true industry. But so one of the challenges that we face, and the reason why legacy is part of the word in medical devices, is it takes a long time for the development of these types of devices to go through, make sure they go through all the proper testing, all the proper clearance, getting FDA cleared, et cetera, and to be safe for to be used on patients. And when you think about the life cycle of how long these things can take, you could run through an entire, let's say Windows operating system was embedded inside of one of these devices. You could run through an entire life cycle of an OS. And then when that brand new device is released, it's a Windows 7, and that's going to be, depreciated within 6 months after a brand new device is entered the market. And so how can the manufacturers keep up with that when they have these very, very, very long lead times in order to get a new device introduced? And then on top of all of that, some of these devices are incredibly expensive. And so the life cycle for how long they're going to be installed inside of a provider's space, can easily go 10, 15 years. And that's because that's the only appetite that a restricted, cost-pressured institution is going to be able to have to introduce this. So even if we solve the problem today, we're going to have this problem with legacy for the next 15 years. And so but the good news is, in all of this, is all of the parties are coming together. And, Cletus sort of alluded to this a little bit about what's going on the Hill, and I don't want to sort of jump in before we get to those questions. But, there's a lot of conversations happening on both the FDA side. The FDA is very, very much understands what the issue is, and they understand what the issue is both from the manufacturer's perspective and the provider's perspective as part of this three-legged stool that we have. So you've got our regulators who understand it, and then you also have our legislators who are not introducing new bills to try to solve the problem, although there's some of that that's going on. But, there's committees, within Congress that are bringing people together, bringing industry together, bringing all of these parties together to really sit down and talk about these problems. And, one of the conversations that's getting ready to be happening here very shortly is, should we just not have some standard end of support, end of life cycle stamps on these devices so that, we have the manufacturers have to be accountable for supporting a device through a life cycle, which is inclusive of cybersecurity for a period of time. And then when the providers, the HDOs, the healthcare delivery organizations, when they're done, and when the life cycle is over, if we continue to use these devices, well, the risk has to be on us, for having made that decision. And so we have our own responsibility in this process as well. So that's my 2 cents, and I'm sure we can get into more of that too.
Eric, I want to follow up on that. You talked about different people understanding the issue and appreciating what's going on in order to deal with it. Tell me about what it's like as a CISO you know, and Cletus, you can address this as a CIO. Is this difficult to explain to the rest of your C-suite, your CEO board, when you're trying to get funding? Do they get frustrated and say, why is this so hard to solve? Can't you just put a patch on it? But, you know, people know things to a basic level, right? And like me,
right.
You know, they roll out patches to fix security patches, fix it, okay, installed it, done. Why is this hard to make the rest of the C-suite and the board understand why this is so difficult to solve, or do they get it?
Well, I'll take the first stab at that. In my institution, they get it. And part of the reason why they get it, I mean, there's a lot of education that I did when I joined the organization 4 years ago. And one of the things that I did was right out of the gate, you know, we have to profile risk. They understand risk. You know, the board understands risk. Our C-suite understands risk. And so this is cliche because you hear this all the time, you know, bring risk to the C-suite that's in their terms. You know, you got to do that. And when I did that, I thought about it from the sense of how can I align this back with other risk measures that they're already very familiar with, like clinical effectiveness, quality scores, patient safety outcomes, adverse event, sentinel events, et cetera. And so I use those terms and I use that language, and then I just add the cyber bend to it. You know, so I talk about it from the sense of confidentiality losses, our ability for a resiliency inside of our organization to be resilient against disruption and extortion attacks, aka ransomware, and the ability for IT, health IT, to now be able to cause harm in patients, and we have to be able to respond to those things. And so we talk about that, we profile it, we measure it, and we have the honest conversations. And they also understand, just as providers and clinicians understand, the fixes are not as simple as just push a button and you're done. They get complexity because they work in complexity, and they understand how outcomes are not just based on one particular procedure or treatment or diagnosis. It's a combination of many things. And so, you know, but you got to bring it up, you know, to them at the higher level, and you got to be able to talk to them strategically about what do we need to do to sort of move the ship. And then from there, the challenge is translating that into the actual operational boots on the ground work where the real work happens, and making that be sustained.
Very good. I like that. They get complexity because they work in it. So that was a good point. Cletus, your thoughts around explaining this issue to the people in your world that matter, in the sense of they're the ones whose buy-in you need, both financially and otherwise, to deal with it.
Yeah, we run a relatively complex, large healthcare organization, and you know, you have to think that you know, to Eric's point, education to the board is absolutely essential. But you know, the industry, healthcare industry, has not always been there, and you can look at the data that supports that. The amount of investments in security in healthcare organizations were not anywhere in alignment with other verticals of similar type of longevity. So we're definitely behind you know, other organizations, and it just goes to show that what Eric's saying, there's a significant amount of catch up that we have to play when it comes to educating, you know, our constituents and our boards and executive teams. But they're getting it, and then Eric put it correctly. You put the risk out there, and you identify and quantify the risk in an effective way. Then you know, they understand that. It also you know, unfortunately may be painful for some, but it's helpful for others when events, security breaches occur around the country. That's when there's definitive recognition of what's happening to the industry, or just the potential how that risk is actually even highlighted further. So somebody's compromise is another organization's benefit, because that's when you start to see investments being made in additional focus on security. The piece that's still, I would say, relatively immature, and we talked about mergers and acquisitions earlier. What we haven't done very well yet, because we're still, I think, as an industry, learning with all the M&As and figuring out, working out playbooks of how your strategy. You know, if you think about security and biomedical devices, have we gotten to a point where we're able to, when we're doing the due diligence for a merger and acquisition or something of that nature, that when we're going and assessing that respective organization, are we doing a holistic plan to actually see how vulnerable we are when it comes to the medical devices? Some people may be doing it, and I don't know how well we are, but I would reassure you that there's more to be done in these matters, this kind of effort. And when you think about that for a second, think about before the deal is done, how is IT helping our executive teams and our boards clearly identify the risk to the organization of what those other organizations have, and what does that quantify as a replacement strategy, potential replacement strategy for all of those medical and legacy medical devices. I don't know if we've done that and we've gotten really good at that as a whole, but these are the types of things or discussions or conversations we have to have, and we have to start to think about as we do our due diligence, creating these playbooks, and why we see this particular discipline really increasing exponentially, because we really have to improve, and more importantly, we need to be able to articulate our opportunities and also risks to stakeholders within our organization so that they can make a more effective business decision on what direction they make, or how much investment in dollars that are going to be needed in order to be successful, so that they don't bring back the holding organization, bring them back in a technology platform or technology risk.
Very good. Very good. All right, Eric, let's go with you on this. What are some best practices in equipment procurement that help ensure the right devices are acquired and deployed? So we're talked a lot about dealing with the legacy equipment that can be difficult to manage now. How do we make sure that what we're acquiring now does not put us in that position later?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things you can do here. I'll first start saying that process is incredibly important. In some cases, process can be more important than the level of depth that you go through when you do your evaluations. But you got to get engaged in with supply chain and your legal offices or procurement. Wherever procurement happens, you got to become a spoke in that process, and work with that leadership and work with the operational people, so that you can get them to understand that, these things need to be evaluated, both from a contractual perspective. You should be evaluating how the contracts are being stood up, and as much as possible, build your own templates as far as some legal language around security, and put some legal language in there around medical devices in particular. So we do that. I actually, one of the things that we did was took the post-market guidance that was released by the FDA in 2016, and I took some very, very core and key elements of that, and I put it in contract, because I was still getting conversations with the manufacturers about, them saying, well, we don't have to do cybersecurity. It's just a guidance document, despite the fact that the FDA has been very clear about what their expectations are around cybersecurity. So I made it real, essentially. Doesn't mean that it's always, 100% successful and that we don't have challenges negotiating. We do, just like everybody else does. So contracting, get your language in there, get your boilerplate language in there, get involved in the negotiations so that you can have the conversations with the manufacturers. Also, part of that is you should have a security evaluation of these devices when they come in. There's a standard format, NDS2, it's been around for a long time. Insist on it. Again, just even if it's as simple as get a look at this, understand what the capabilities are, understand what your mitigations are going to be for where certain security controls aren't meeting your standards. Make sure that you have that stuff in there and part of a plan. And once you have the process in place and the stuff is flowing, the information flows, and you'll get visibility and you'll get the access that you need to make sure that the stuff is getting put in place. So, your evaluations, and then I'm going to reference Kevin McDonald here. He's one of the best security individuals, and he focuses entirely on medical devices. He's at Mayo. He's got a large team at Mayo that just does medical device security, as Cletus was referring to earlier, these teams getting differentiated. He gave a really fantastic talk at HIMSS, I believe it was, and it was about, essentially, if you try to establish your security standards to every single medical device ubiquitously across your organization, you're going to fail because it's just too big, and there's just too many of them. So why not instead take 6 things? He's got 6 magic controls. Take 6 things and make that your default baseline, and then you stratify and you determine where else do we need to make sure that we have more and put in more monitoring and oversight. So the 6 things were, I should be able to remember them off the top of my head. I can't, unfortunately, but some of them are very, very innocuous, like change the default password. Don't let the vendor use the same password that they use for your device as they use for every single device that's out there. Turn on a firewall, turn on AV, turn on application whitelisting. I think those are some of the key ones. Again, I don't want to quote them. Kevin's got is the main source of it all. But there's just some really good core components that you should and can do.
Very good. Cletus?
Yeah, I think my point of view is procurement is somewhat of an ambiguous term, and the reason why, whether you're a critical access hospital or a major multi-state academic facility, one challenge that consistently occurs is that our customers, our doctors, tend to bring devices in, medical devices that are unbeknownst to us. They break the procurement methodology many times because if you're if you're an organization that does not have an integrated practice provider world or whatever, you do have the ability of having people coming in and bringing devices into your infrastructure that you don't even know. So I would take it. I'll take the spin that you really have to work with your operators, your hospital operators, your presidents, your medical staff, the individuals throughout the organization, your nursing, your educators, how medical devices can potentially compromise care, and being able to it goes back to education, going back to being able to tell them and clearly articulate the level of impact in the event of something occurring. Not that we are trying to be draconian and totalitarian to tell them what they can and cannot do. We're not clinicians in many cases. We're here to help, but knowing that if they don't take the right process in adopting the protocol that we're putting in place, that it would in essence compromise the care that they're trying to provide to their customers and their patients. So it's a combination of education as well as utilizing at times our IT, our technical tools, to make sure that we are not allowing these devices, network access control kind of controllers that do not allow devices onto your domain without inherent security protocols being outlined, and allowing that the technology division to help control some of those devices coming on the network. Now, there are devices that come in that don't go on the network that can still compromise our organization. Again, this is where you really need to communicate with all of your operators, your nurses, your doctors, inherently to tell them and let them understand why we're making these changes and why these choices. We just cannot continue to allow people to put things on and go in and providing care the way they want to. That's a very difficult conversation, but it's a conversation that must be had with our providers and our partners.
Oh, hold on one second. Scott, I wonder if you could take it from the other side. Obviously, you're on the vendor side, but being from that side, what advice can you give to hospital IT executives around procuring biomedical devices to ensure that the security is up to snuff?
Sure. I think one of the things that we try to do at Draeger, and I think is also important in the procurement process, is find out who's doing security for the medical device manufacturer. What's their posture? What's their response time? Do they have someone that's in charge of security that you can talk to? Do they have someone that can answer security questions? How well do they understand their devices? Those are all things that are going to help you later on once you purchase the product, because you're going to find things as you deploy, or later on as needs and requirements change. You're going to really need to understand how your device works so you can take the proper precautions and put mitigations if necessary. So I think the relationship with your manufacturer and how open and honest they are with their communication around security, I think is really going to help you in the long run. And you should look for a way to judge that during the procurement process.
Very good. All right, Scott, let's stick with you here. And I know everybody wants to get in on this question. Scott, do you have thoughts around industry resources that you use to stay abreast of what's going on in this area? Anything you want to offer?
Yeah, so what drives us as an organization, for better or worse, is the FDA guidances. I think that's what pushes the industry forward. Aside from that, we internally do a lot of work with the Department of Defense, and they have a very mature procurement process and evaluation process called RMF that's well documented. So that's kind of where we look to for guidance on what to do for our products. A lot of that's very IT product specific, so the closer your device is to an IT product, the easier it fits into that. That's a source that we use internally.
Very good. Eric, resources?
Okay, let me, if you don't mind, I'm going to take this one a little bit. So first of all, I'm going to do a shameless plug. October 3rd to 5th, the CHIME Advocacy Summit is going on up in D.C., and everybody should go and attend that, because we're bringing together a lot of the manufacturer space. We're talking about health IT in general, as well as the medical device manufacturing stuff. And we've got a lot of the regulatory side of the house, the legislative side of the house, and great providers and manufacturers there to talk about, really dive into a lot of these types of topics. There's a lot going on right now in DC, and there's a lot of different ways that people can get involved, and a lot of different ways that everybody in this call can get involved, either strategically or tactically. So first and foremost, if you want to get involved and be part of the solution to these problems, there's a joint cyber working group that exists, which is a public-private partnership between HHS and industry. And so there's these two concepts: this Healthcare Sector Coordinating Council, which is established due to the fact that healthcare is one of the critical infrastructures that was identified under one of Obama's presidential directives, and the Government Coordinating Council is the government side of that house. So we come together in this joint working group, and that joint working group is specifically focused on cybersecurity and cybersecurity issues. And that group has, I actually lost count, there's about 13 or 14 different task groups that exist inside of it. One of them is getting ready to release a joint security plan that was really developed between Kevin McDonald was heavily involved in this, and Rob Suarez and Suzanne Schwartz from the FDA. It was a joint partnership between the providers, the manufacturers, which is what Rob represents, and Suzanne from the FDA, and trying to establish a framework that is voluntary and can be adopted by the manufacturers and some of the health IT medical technology product individuals on how to build good, resilient devices and products before they're introduced into the environment. So that's coming very soon. It'll be released. I probably shouldn't put dates down because you never know, Murphy's Law might take over and something gets delayed, but it's coming very soon. It should come in the fall and early winter. And then comparable to that, there's this group that I lead, which is about 150 medical professionals, CISOs, privacy individuals, compliance people, and vendor advisory folks. And what we've done is, this is the 4 or 5D effort that I talked about, but it's run underneath this joint working group. What we've tried to tackle is, what are the 5 threats that we face, that we feel as an industry we face most prominently? And then based on those 5 threats, what are the 10 practices that we could implement as providers in order to help mitigate our issues. And really the whole goal of this is move the needle across the industry and try to just do some better blocking and tackling and resiliency type of and hygiene type of activities, and answer the question of how you actually accomplish this without having to go to the NIST documents. You will have to go to them, but without having to read 5,000 pages of a special publication 800 series NIST document, which gets really dense and really hard to understand unless you're an expert in that. So that product is coming out very soon as well. It'll be released at the end of the year, and it's going to be focused in on practices that are going to provide small providers, medium-sized providers, and large-sized providers with common practices you can do. On top of all of that, there's like the FDA is getting ready to reopen the pre-market guidance. It's coming again, and they're going to be really fleshing out the inside of what that entails and how you build cyber into it. And the FDA is now understanding. I think they understood it before, but they're going to really bake this into the guidance document, that the medical devices are connected to our ecosystem. And though we have vulnerabilities in medical devices, and those can directly cause patient safety issues, and that's important, there's also the issue of these things connect into a larger and greater ecosystem. They can be used as a launching point, a pivot point, a lateral movement to cause further disruption inside the environment. And if they can be used to bring down an environment, that's also a patient safety issue. You know, if you have a cancer patient who needs to be receiving treatment and your hospital gets shut down due to extortion, you have a patient safety problem. And the manufacturers, 5 years ago might not have thought of that as a patient safety concern because it wasn't a direct impact to a patient. So there's more of that that's going to be coming, and there's going to be some workshops happening earlier in the year where there's public comment and public forums. And so I would really encourage everybody to go out to Silver Springs in Virginia or Maryland, I think, I'm sorry, and go to the FDA and go and participate in that public workshop.
Very
I could talk about more things as well. But
Please, you got anything else there?
No, yeah, I do, and I'm glad Eric plugged the Advocacy Summit because I was going to, if not. So, yeah, if you could hear, there are plenty of different resources and things to do out there in D.C. and regulatory side. But I would also encourage organizations that they look within. We at our Collide, our Great Lakes Health organization in Western New York and in the Pennsylvania area, what we decided to do is take things into our own hands. We created a think tank that consisted of industry leaders. We brought people in from all over the globe, particularly in D.C., FDA, FBI, Secret Service, and had the medical device manufacturers attend and talk to the region about some of the challenges and share some of the concerns and thoughts around security and how we can work together to best this particular challenge. And those are the type of things that you're going to need to do on a public-private effort, not necessarily just wait what the feds are doing or the state or local municipalities are doing, but really start from within. And you can do really great collaborative efforts by engaging your colleagues, and having some pushing some internal opportunities to improve by just sharing information more intimately amongst your colleagues and other types of providers. So much that our CISO, our Chief Information Security Officer, Kevin Gilbert, he's continued the effort by bringing in stakeholders from all over the region, and we've also matured that out to include other types of industry. So these are the types of things that you don't always have to look external or wait for the federal regulatory policies to change. You can truly start to change the dial by just asking your colleagues to work together and come up with using groupthink to come up with some strategies to have some really great progress to move forward with security and device security.
All right, very good. We're going to go to our audience Q&A now. We've got a few questions in, so I'll ask those. If any more come to you, just type them in the Q&A box. Leave the default set to all panelists, and we will take a look. Eric, let's start with you. Any thoughts on trading safety for security?
trading safety for security? Was that the question?
Yeah, I think maybe usability should be in
yeah.
there too somewhere. Usually usability is the issue.
Sure. So I would not make those mutually exclusive statements. I mean, obviously, the patient's at the center of everything that we do, and certainly security should never harm a patient. So if that's where the question was going, we don't want to do that. You know, but the safety of the patient, the security of the patient, the security that we apply actually helps with the safety, delivering safe treatments, you know, and safe care to our patients. And you know, the getting into usability and productivity and effectiveness, I mean, we would have to probably have another 45-minute conversation on that one. But just generally speaking, it's all based on risk, and you know, we can't lock down our system so much that it's impossible to work. You know, prevention is a very core and key control and key measure that we use inside of our systems. But you know, someone once told me, I thought this was a great analogy. We can lock things down for the 90% or 95%, you know, periods of time. But in healthcare, the edge cases, the 5% comes up. And when that 5% comes up, it's really important that the providers and clinicians have access to do the things that they need to do in those edge cases. And if you have locked them out because 95% felt good, then you could actually have a problem on your hands around being able to provide care for that patient. So detection and response capabilities, you know, opening up your accesses, your preventative controls, and opening that up a little bit more to account for all, so the edge can still happen, so the clinicians can still practice, but then making sure that you have really, really solid visibility, you have good incident response, you have good detection capabilities, good playbooks and run books, and you're on top of it. You're responding to those cases where something does go awry. I mean, that's incredibly important. In fact, not to say that I don't want to equally or try to put any sort of weight on which is better, prevention, detection, or response, other than to say all three of them are incredibly important, and you cannot try to just focus on one of the three and think that you're going to have an effective security program.
Cletus?
I don't think you can, I've listened, Eric, and I don't think you can actually do either or. So I think you have to take both into account, security and safety, and you know, knowing one can impact the other. If we go ahead and put one over the other, that's an issue. In our world, just like Eric, patients come first. We do everything for the care of the patient. But understanding that if we're not securing our environments and ensuring that these devices are actually taken care of and controlled, that would also provide a negative outcome for our patients and care. So I look at this as it is symbiotic. You cannot, you know, alienate one from the other.
Scott, I'm going to give you the last word here. We could easily go another hour. We've got lots of questions we can get to, but we're kind of out of time. So your thoughts on the last question or anything in general you want to close with?
Yeah, so on the last question, it just kind of hits home, because that gets brought up a lot when we talk about designing security. You know, we're very safety conscious and clinical conscious, and I think it happens a lot when, you know, you're asked, do you jeopardize safety? When you're thinking very narrowly and trying to apply IT-type controls to medical devices, they don't map very well. You know, and you can't always do the easy things, quote unquote, that you would do in the IT world. And I really challenge my designers and my engineers to find a creative solution where we can do both, right? Is there a way to allow clinical workflow, not disrupt care, and still provide some level of security? And, you know, we talk about techniques like that was talked about monitoring. You know, if you do have to turn off security for an event, is there auditing that takes place? Is there other, you know, things you can put in place of it? So I really use that as an opportunity to challenge our designers and our engineers to find the right balance.
Very good. Excellent. Well, that's about all we had time for today. When you close out your WebEx window, you're going to be taken to a post-event survey. If you could take a moment to answer that, we'd appreciate it. Regarding continuing education, those of you who hold the CHIME CYIO certification. Get 1 CEU for attending our event, so let Sean know you were here, and if you've asked us to do so, we will. If you need a certificate of attendance for another CEU program, you can use the final slide in this deck. You'll receive an email when our archive recording has been posted to our YouTube channel. If you'd like us to produce a webinar on the topic of your choice, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team, and you can go to our website to view our upcoming schedule. So with that, I very much want to thank our panel, Eric Decker, Cletus Earl, and Scott Bristol. I want to thank Draeger for sponsoring. I want to thank Chime for co-producing this event with us, and I want to thank you, our attendees, for continuing to join our webinars. So with that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.